Today, I want to do a full walkthrough of our new plugin for After Effects in Premiere called Despill Maestro. I want to start with the basics, but hit on some of the more advanced things you can do along the way. If you've worked with green screen or blue screen footage before, you're probably familiar with spill coming from the screen and bleeding onto whatever is in the foreground. So Despill Maestro is here to either get rid of that or blend it better with your environment, whichever you'd like, so your composites look great. First, we're going to look at some practice footage from actionvfx.com. I'm not affiliated with them, but want to give a shout out to them for this great resource of footage to practice with. We've got this shot of an astronaut walking in front of a green screen that I want to look at first, because this is a really great spill example. Because of the reflection on his helmet and his white suit, it's picking up a whole lot of green from around him. I've got just a simple roto brush roto to work with for now, and you can really see how much green is left once we isolate him from the background. So we'll start just by dropping Despill Maestro on top, and its default setting is green, so right away you see it working for this shot. If we start looking at the effect controls, first we have the despill amount. 100% removes all the spill, but you can lessen it if you need to leave a little bit in, or even increase it over 100% if you want to. The next option is which color to despill, red, green, blue, or custom. We'll go over custom later, but for this shot, we obviously want green. If we switch to red, you see it removes the red around his neck and in his skin tone, or if we switch it to blue, there's a little bit around his neck and his patch it'll pull out. So right out of the gate, it works well, and it's easy to use for the basics. But there's a lot more that we can dial in when we need to be a little more flexible for not ideal conditions. We've got a lot of options under our next section of spill refinement, starting with algorithm. It defaults to channel average with a bias control, but there's a bunch of different algorithms to choose from based on how you want to handle the channel math. We won't go over all the options right now, but they'll all be listed online in the user guide to explain specifically how they work. The ones I use most are channel average and then tweak the bias, or double green-blue average, or sometimes limit spill color to 90% red. Feel free to try all of them and pick whichever works for your specific shot. Some algorithms will show the channel bias slider between 0 and 100 if it applies to that algorithm. That represents the weighting between the two non-spill channels when calculating the spill limit. Since we're currently set to green despill color, at 0 it would only use the red channel, at 100 it only uses the blue channel, and at 50 it's an average of both. Adjusting this lets you fine-tune the despill, so if your footage has warmer tones, you might bias towards red. If they're cooler, you might bias towards blue. Expansion and softness are our next two parameters, but to understand them a little bit more, I'm going to switch to our next example composition. Here we have just a default 4-color gradient, and again I'll drag over Despill Maestro with its default settings. You can see it immediately pulls out all this green, and the green out of this yellow area too. I want to draw your attention to this smooth transition area in the middle, which technically isn't green anymore, it's more of a gray. But if this were a comp you were doing, it might still come off as some residual green edge that you want to get rid of. I can try increasing the despill amount, but that just aggressively removes from the same area. This is where expansion and softness come into play. If I increase the expansion, you can see that my spill removal will push out further than before, and now include those areas that appeared greenish-gray. Increasing the softness here can create a little more fall-off to smooth out those transition areas too. Our last option under spill refinement is for desaturation. I find this most useful on blue screens, so let's take a look at another example real quick. Here we have a blue screen driving shot with just the default settings but changing the despill color to blue. We're left with basically a green screen or a teal screen. Typically, spill removal works by pulling down just the targeted channel to match your reference channels, so you're only affecting one color component. Desaturation takes a different approach. Instead of just reducing blue, it pushes all the color in those despilled areas toward gray. So this might be one of those cases where you'd rather desaturate the blue screen and push it towards gray instead of green or teal. The next big feature of Despill Maestro is replacing the original spill color with another color. So to see how that works, let's jump back to the astronaut we started with. Let's drop down the color replace section of our effect to see the options we have. First is just a checkbox to enable color replacement or not. It defaults to a mid-gray for the color, but you can set them to whatever you'd like with the color picker. For example, I'll drop a fiery background behind your astronaut like he's walking on the surface of the sun. I want to match this red-orange, so I'll pick a color similar to that in our color selection. And you can see the green spilled previous now gets replaced with our new color. The color strength parameter just controls how much color is getting added in. Lessen it if you want less color replacement. Now, if I look around his face, you can see that we're getting a bright highlight edge coming from this color replace. So this is a case where the Luma correction parameter would help out. Luma correction looks at the brightness of your replacement color and it'll darken the affected areas proportionally so you don't end up with unnaturally bright areas where the color is being added in. Lastly, if you're working in 32-bit, the clamp 32-bit checkbox will keep your values within 0 to 1 range if you want to avoid the addition of your color replacement going over 1. Another big feature of Despill Maestro is what we're calling protection. In a perfect world, you would never need this, but we all know that's not the case. So for this demo, I have some stock footage of this gentleman on a green screen in a blue suit holding a tablet, also with a blue screen. If we drop on Despill Maestro and flip it to blue, you can see we're losing his suit color as well. So protection helps us target the colors we want to despill while retaining similar colors. Granted, there's a way to separate the colors from each other. Let's dive in. Drop down the protection group and we've got some options to work with. Let's enable it with the checkbox on top, and you can already see these sliders are set to blue because we picked blue as our color. These protection ranges will set their defaults based on what despill color you pick. At the very bottom of our effect, we have a view mode, and one of those options is to view the protection mask. So we'll start with that while we dial in our protection ranges. So I'm going to start by just opening up the hue range a little bit so we're less restrictive on the blue hues we allow. We know the tablet is more saturated blue and brighter blue than his suit. So along the saturation range, we can slide the top end and see where the tablet starts coming in so we can make sure that we're under that. And then for the lightness range, we can increase the top end a little bit too. Now that we have our protection range set, still while we're looking at the protection mask, we've got a softness parameter and a blur parameter we can adjust to make sure our mask is looking as good as it should. We can now flip the view mode back to normal and see that we've got the blue in his suit back. If you want to dial the protection back a little bit, the protection strength will control if it protects your color selection fully or only a little bit. So that's the overview on how protection works, and it's something I'm really excited to have in the toolbox because there's been many times I've encountered an outfit with blue in front of a blue screen. While we're still looking at this shot, let's take a look at the next section as well, alpha handling. This isn't meant to replace your full keying plugins, but there might be some cases where you find it useful to generate alpha based on the spill. So you can do that with these settings under this group. Hopefully most of these options are pretty self-explanatory, so if you check the box for silhouette alpha, you'll get an alpha channel based on the despill color. Just a quick note that all the previous settings will apply to the alpha as well. Check the box to invert alpha if you'd rather stencil the spilled color instead of silhouette it. You've got low and high thresholds to dial in the range of your alpha, kind of like a levels adjustment. The low threshold sets your black point, anything below that becomes fully transparent. The high threshold sets your white point, anything above that becomes fully opaque, and everything in between gets stretched to fill that range. Falloff lets you apply a gamma curve to the alpha, so values below 1 will brighten up your midtones and values above 1 will darken them. And then smoothing applies a different interpolation curve to the alpha edge. You've got smooth, smoother, and smoothest options that progressively soften the transition between transparent and opaque areas. Our last group of options to cover is the rendering group. We've got a Use GPU checkbox that controls if you want to use the GPU for rendering or not. In case you don't know if the GPU or CPU is faster for your specific system, we have a benchmark button that'll tell you how long it takes to render with each, so you can know which is faster for your specific system. In my testing, CPU is usually a little bit faster, unless you're using protection with a protection blur. Then GPU might be a little faster. Lastly, we have a few different view modes. Normal shows you the final despilled result. Spill Map will give you a black and white representation of the spill areas. If you're using the Silhouette Alpha options, then the Alpha View mode will give you black or white based on the alpha channel. Last is the Protection Mask View mode, which we've used previously. I know this video is getting long already, but there's one more quick thing to cover. So far, we've been picking red, green, or blue as our spill color, but you also have the option to pick a custom color. When you choose one of the standard channels, the despill is only affecting that single channel. It's pulling down green or pulling down blue. But real-world screens aren't always a perfect primary color. If you choose custom color, you can use the eyedropper to sample the actual spill you're seeing in your footage. The spill removal will work along that specific color direction, pulling down multiple channels proportionally instead of just one. Let's look back at the driving blue screen we looked at earlier and see how the custom color works differently. I can change the color to custom and then sample the blue that we actually have, and that gives a much different result than using the blue channel we used before. And of course, all the same other parameters work with custom selections too, so you can dial in exactly what kind of spill removal you want. But oftentimes, custom with a sampled color will give you different results than just picking standard green or blue. That concludes our deep dive into Despill Maestro and some of the scenarios where you might want to use certain features. We hope you find it useful and flexible so that it becomes the tool you reach for anytime you need to despill.